Hey guys, my name is Jeff, and this is a Local Motors Rally Fighter, which is one of the first crowdsourced produced vehicles on the planet, and this particular car is going to be selling for no reserve at the 2023 Barret-Jackson Las Vegas Auctions. Now, before we get into all of the details and open this vehicle up for you, first, a quick word from our sponsor.
Life is too short to drive boring cars!
So this is a Local Motors Rally Fighter, and these were actually produced out of Phoenix, Arizona. They built about 100 of them in total, with the numbers kind of varying, and they changed throughout production. There were some early models that were released in batches, and they were sort of built through a loophole. These are actually street legal vehicles, and the way they were able to produce them is there are some rules that the US has that if you build a sort of factory garage vehicle, as long as the owner of the vehicle helps build the vehicle, in this case the owners were invited out to work on their own rally fighters they were going to be driving, you could then legalize the vehicle, and all of these have what would be state-assigned VINs that then make them street legal to drive on the road, even though, of course, the main purpose from looking at this beast of a vehicle is obviously to take it off-road. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of the first crowdsourced vehicles, and what that means is all of the components were kind of picked and parked using things like the internet to find some of the vehicles and components, including the body being designed from a totally different third party, a guy by the name of Sang-Ho Kim, whose signature is on the side of the vehicle. I'll point it out to you in a sec. And then it uses a lot of high volume production parts, so you'll see all sorts of different manufacturers on the vehicle. There's Volkswagen parts, BMW parts, Ford parts, GM parts, and Honda parts in this. Everything that was high volume, so you could keep the cost as low as possible. Initially, these were supposed to be around $50,000, but the final production number would actually end up around $100,000 if you wanted to purchase yourself a rally fighter like this one. So let's start going through what all's actually been sitting in this beast of a vehicle. So these are perfect for dune hopping. The CEO, John Roger, would actually jump his personal vehicle over 500 times during testing for the rally fighter. In the front, we have some pretty generic sort of 7-inch fog lights that you would find that could be used on things like Jeeps and whatnot. And then we have our first sort of insight into some of our off-road components. Now, the cool part about these awesome Goodyear Wranglers we have here is they're actually held on by these set of beadlocks, and these are real beadlock wheels. What beadlocks do is they have this separate outside ring that helps hold in the tire bead, and so what that does is when you're off-road, you can actually air down the tires to as low as like 10 psi, and you don't have to worry about the tire getting knocked off the actual wheel, and that'll hold them on so you can go off-roading with your rally fighter. Underneath is actually a totally custom tube chassis under here, but it uses, again, a lot of easy to source components, including the powertrain, which is actually mounted about the midsection here of the vehicle. So right in the middle of the car, and it's actually mounted slightly to the right to sort of help offset the weight of the driver and give it a near perfect 50-50 weight distribution throughout the vehicle. Now, obviously, if you have a passenger in the car, that kind of upsets some of the weight balance, but it's perfect with driver in there. That way, it's the perfect off-road performance vehicle for things like, it was kind of inspired by trophy trucks, let's say. But the cool part about the mid-engine part, the chassis, you can actually see the front of our LS3, which sits back in there. You're looking at about 430 horsepower and 424 pound-feet of torque, and that would propel this vehicle, which weighs around 3,800 pounds, 0 to 60 in around 6 seconds with a top speed of 131 miles per hour, which is pretty impressive. With all of this extra room, we actually have 18 inches of suspension travel in the front, and then we have 20 inches of suspension travel in the rear. But a pretty cool vehicle. Now, as we move a little bit further down, we actually have our Rally Fighter badge to tell us what this is, along with a variety of Local Motors badging throughout. And below is actually the signature for the man that designed the body as part of the crowdsourcing for what was done for the car. So you can see here's our signature for the designer and a little LM for Local Motors badge on the side. Now, here's where some more cool stuff kicks in. So these are actually going to be Honda door handles. So if we go ahead and open the door to a Rally Fighter, we also have some Honda door handles on the inside. You can see they've been mounted sideways now, and that's still our Honda door handles, makes it a little bit more unique for the Rally Fighter. And if we come inside, we have a 6-speed automatic transmission. The earlier Rally Fighters actually had a 4-speed, and this being one of the later cars would be a little bit more updated. This particular car is for sale from a baseball player. Now, one of the unique things, we have this tiny steering wheel that does have some Local Motors details, but sitting behind that is actually a Ford steering column, and this Ford F-150 steering column meant you had a Ford key for the ignition, but because you had Honda door handles, you had a separate different key to get into your car, which would be a Honda key. So in order for your rally fighter, you had two different keys to get into it, a Ford key and a Honda key, one to get into the vehicle and one for the ignition, which is kind of a fun fact. And you also have a Ford brake booster, which sits next to your GM engine and your GM transmission. Really cool, interesting details. Now, in back here, we actually have some added options on this car. This car has this rally light package, which was one of the extras, the optionals. It could be equipped on your rally fighter. We do have some extra bucket seats with some 5-point harnesses. Sorry, not 5-point harnesses, extra seat belts, back seat, and even a spare tire that sits in the back there. Some little cool details. Now, even looking at the gauges, you can see there's a lot of more, let's say, generic parts that can be found at the like of hardware stores as far as gauges go, and just fairly accessible parts to try and keep the cost down of what you were looking for the rally fighter. But a really cool vehicle here. We even have our state assigned VIN, which just sits in the door there. Go ahead and close this up. When we come around to the rear, like I mentioned earlier, we have 20 inches of suspension travel in the rear, and then we actually have a Ford 9-inch rear end with a 3-link suspension, and that's a pretty beefy way to sort of contain everything that they felt was just a little bit more rugged as opposed to using some of these standard components that are available. We have our Honda taillights, which of course are somewhere, I want to say mid-2000s Honda Civic that could be shared as well, and then another little nod reminding us that this is actually a Local Motors vehicle. Massive skid plates on the front. This is just one of those really durable vehicles. But here's the sad part. So like I mentioned, they built about 100 of these total, released in batches. Unfortunately though, Local Motors has sort of shifted their focus since, and they actually went out of business in 2022. Now the good part is, somebody that worked for the company has since bought the rights to the Local Motors brand and has now started reproducing these in small numbers. There's probably a little bit more than 100 now at this point. And they even have availability to get parts. So in case anything happens to your Local Motors rally fighter, you can actually still approach them, get some spare parts, some recreations, things like that, so you don't have any worries. Not to mention, as I pointed out, a lot of these parts are actually readily available. You could go to Ford, GM, BMW, Volkswagen, or even Honda and get replacements for a lot of these parts should anything happen to your rally fighter while you're taking it off the trail. But a really cool vehicle, certainly stands out with its very Mad Max-like appearance, very rugged and capable off-roader, as I mentioned, with John Rogers, the previous CEO who had jumped his personal car over 500 times. Really cool cars. You just don't see them that often, obviously, since there's only 500, but they're really cool nonetheless. So, if you're interested in purchasing your next collector car, be sure to check out autohunter.com. This is our online auction with cars going live every single weekday, or our sister site, ClassicCars.com, which has over 30,000 cars currently live on the site. If you enjoyed the video, could hit that like button for us. We'd really appreciate it. Feel free to throw a comment down below and let us know what you think of this Local Motors rally fighter, and of course, get subscribed for more content like this in the future. Thanks so much for watching.